Just a minute. Let me read it to everyone if it's appropriate. She may be able to join us later. She's at a meeting. Okay, so we're not waiting for her, but she'll join us later.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. So here we are with Beshalach, and this parashah has, I'd say, one of the most recognizable scenes in the entire Exodus story, certainly one of the most cinematic.
Behold his mighty hand!
They don't make them like that anymore. Thanks to Cecil B. DeMille's 1956 epic, that's the image that most of us of a certain age have of the parting of the waters. Back in medieval times, they didn't have Hollywood special effects to capture the dramatic and miraculous crossing. This page is among 34 illuminations in a Passover Haggadah from about 700 years ago. Created in Spain, probably Barcelona, it's known as the Sarajevo Haggadah because that's where it's preserved in the National Museum after centuries of journeying across Europe, including being hidden from the Nazis during World War II. The upper panel shows wide-eyed Israelites crossing the parted waters while Pharaoh and his chariots are washed away in the background. And in the lower panel, Miriam keeps a beat with her hand drum while she and the women sing the Song of the Sea to encourage their people to follow Moses. And art of that part of the story is what I'd like to focus on. The Song of Miriam the Prophetess is by 19th century English painter William Gale, whose specialty was Orientalism, the Victorian name for Middle East-themed art. He does include Moses in the distance up there on the promontory, his staff raised high to open the path across the sea. But the main focus is Miriam, joyfully leading the Israelite women in song. The scene gets a classical look in Children of Israel Crossing the Red Sea by Henri Frédéric Chopin. Born in Germany to French parents, his father was a renowned sculptor. Young Henri studied in Paris and Rome, gaining a reputation for exquisitely detailed and dramatic paintings of battles and biblical scenes. Again, we have Moses holding his staff over the waters, with the Egyptian chariots about to be crushed by a massive wave. But Chopin's knowledge of the text is also apparent, as you can see Miriam in the upper right, timbrel in hand, leading the women in the song that helps give this Shabbat its nickname, Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of Song. For Marc Chagall's biblical paintings published in the 1960s, this deceptively simple watercolor has an outsized Moses in the foreground with the throng of Israelites completing their passage, with Miriam, over there in the lower corner, Miriam at the head of the line. This is from a 1930 Passover Haggadah, illustrated by pioneering Israeli painter and sculptor Nachum Gutman. Born in the region that is now Moldova, he and his family moved to Ottoman-ruled Palestine in the early 1900s. He studied at the Beshalach Academy as well as in European art centers, Vienna, Berlin, and Paris. And then returning home, Gutman established a distinctive Israeli style, brightly colored and abstract. In this simple painting, he puts Moses and Aaron, of course, in the front, but at the very front of the line, Nachum Gutman puts Miriam and the women leading the Israelites to safety. An American-born artist who now lives and works in Israel, Chicago native Ellen Miller, portrays the miraculous scene with her microcalligraphy technique. Using a very fine pen, she writes the letters of not just Beshalach, but the entire book of Shemot, Exodus, in the parting of the Red Sea. Only by looking closely, such as at this section with Miriam leading the women in song, can you see all the letters arranged with the various colors to create the image.
Wow.
Colorful fabrics make up the tapestry of Dancing Miriam by Bracha Brim Lavi. Born in post-war Poland, she arrived in Israel as a child in 1957 and quickly showed her artistic talents. After military service, she studied at Bezalel, where she met a fellow designer and artist, Menachem Lavi, whom she would eventually marry, and together they have an art studio in Jerusalem, which she calls her source of inspiration for all her works, especially tapestries, such as this one using brightly colored felt material. Florida-based fashion designer Debbie Danheiser gives a decidedly contemporary take on Miriam's song, with a background of Judaica, the Shabbat candles and challah on one side, the wine goblets on the other, and musical notes rising above the women who are more in evening dress than biblical array. But bright colors and Afro-Caribbean themes mark the works of Brooklyn-born Laura James, who has this take on the splitting of the sea, reimagining the biblical scene through the lens of her black and Antiguan heritage. She packs a lot into the scene. Moses, guided by God and a group of angels from overhead, while below, Pharaoh's chariots are washed to their watery graves, and over to the side, there's Miriam leading the women, leading the entire throng in song. And in fact, other than Moses, all of them in this painting are women. Miriam comes to the foreground in this Laura James painting, Sing a Joyful Noise Unto the World. The artist calls it a celebration of freedom and faith, radiating strength and sisterhood, a tribute to resilience, leadership, and the sacred power of song. That's from Laura James, and that is art for this Shabbat Shirah take on Beshalach.
Who
Did you
was the
find
first
any?
one?
Did you find any art that had Nachshon in it?
I did. There is, I believe, I'm trying to remember which one. There was an animation that I found that had it. I know Nachshon is supposed to be the one who, according to Midrash, is the first into the water.
Yeah.
Or into the crossing the water. I did find some animation. In the animated film from the 90s, the Prince of Egypt, the first to cross is Nachshon.
Uh-huh.
That was a great movie, the cartoon adaptation. Yeah.
Yeah, and got a terrific soundtrack. Hans Zimmer used a lot of the themes, a lot of the melodies that we know from our songs and our liturgy are in. If you just watch it for the soundtrack, he really did a terrific job of incorporating them. Like when they're crossing the sea, you hear Micha Mocha going on. It's woven into the melody. The English Orientalist. That was his name was. I should know these by now. William Gale. Here.
I think I told you guys that I had the connection to the people of the book, Geraldine Brooks, about the Sarajevo Haggadah, that the main character in that book was actually my sister's mother-in-law, Miriam Bakovic.
He was a researcher.
I know I truncated the story of it, but it's an amazing story because, I mean, first of all, it was spirited out of Spain during the Inquisition and then hidden, and it showed up in the 1800s and was sold to the Sarajevo Museum. And the librarian of the museum, when the Nazis started marching into Yugoslavia, the librarian hid it. And then found a mosque in a mountain village where the imam hid it in the mosque. And then at the end of the war, they were able to retrieve it and kept it in a bank vault until they had the museum refurbished.
Yep. She later became a general in in the army there, and the librarian became honored in Israel as one of the I can't remember the term. They have a special name for the Gentiles who are honored in Israel. Anyone remember that term?
The righteous Gentiles.
Righteous Gentiles.
Righteous,
Yeah.
There is a walk that honors them by Yad Vashem, and there are trees planted with individual plaques for each one.
The term, I believe, translated from Hebrew is the righteous among the nations. That's the term for the righteous Gentiles.
Speaking of trees from Israel, when you guys were young and went to Hebrew school, did you used to have to sell those stamp books with leaves that were supposed to, be trees that get planted in Israel?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I just
That
thought
and the pushkas. I remember that, and the little stamps to get a tree.
yeah.
But see, when Aviva went to school, it wasn't called Hebrew school; it was called school.
Yes.
So when I went to Israel, I said, "Well, where's the forest I planted?" They go, "Everyone
Yeah,
else."
right. There was an Israeli movie, I think it was in the 50s or early 60s, where they had a group of tour guides who would change the sign so that when people from who donated a lot for trees, there would be a sign saying, "This forest donated by so-and-so." And when a new group of tourists would come, they would change the sign for that
I
group.
remember that movie. But it was the whole thing was misconstrued because basically it ended up being monoculture, and over time disease would hit it and whole swaths of forest would vanish. They do not plant like that anymore. They have to plant mixed plantings.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought trees was just another way of saying rifle stocks.
There's such a connection between the idea of humanity and trees that this holiday of Shavuot, not Shavuot, Tu B'Shvat, is, it's there's a reason it's become more over time. It's become celebrated in more different ways because the idea of the potential in a plant, in a tree, is very much mirrored in the idea of the potential as humans and the idea of time needed in order for that potential to develop is very much mirrored in our parashah today with the idea of the circuitous route. That, the potential we have as humans is not just there for the ta-da unveiling, that it is in its essence something that takes a long time to develop and emerge.
Beautiful.
I texted Sarah. I know the VOG is very bad today, so I'm just hoping she's feeling well. We'll see. A couple of announcements. First of all, Trina's mom passed away. I believe it might have been a few days ago, maybe 3 or 4 days ago. I just heard yesterday. And so we think about her. I think she graced her family with the ability to have all of them be where they needed to be and not have her passing be a big disruption. And I really am a firm believer that that is something we hold on to and are able to do even when we can't do other things. I've seen it too many times. So her last blessing to her family is to see them settled as best they could and then make her departure. So we think of Trina today and her whole family. And the other thing is, I can't bring it into focus, but if you notice behind me, the Israeli flag no longer has a yellow ribbon. And again, very fittingly for our parashah today, when the last hostage's bones were brought home for burial. It's a new beginning for an ability to heal. So I wanted to mention that as we say the Misheberach before we start today. Does anyone have someone they would like to say Misheberach for specifically before we start?
My son Evan Astolat, his Hebrew name is Michael Bat Chadasura. Ben Chadasura.
Ben.
Sorry.
I think just the people missing on the screen today, so we should definitely say Misheberach for Marilyn, who I think is on Oahu, and Sarah, and to our greater community in Kentucky. We just lost a friend um, to cancer, and the whole community is healing together, which is a beautiful thing to watch and be a part of.
Betsy Stoller.
And as always, we always include in our community Jan and Shari and Alice in our Mishabera.
Debbie Cohn.
Dan Levitt.
Oh, Yuda, would you like to sing us in? You have to unmute. You have to unmute.
I don't want to mute the chimes, which I love, and I know you consider it a disruption, so I just mute myself instead so I
Actually,
can hear the chimes.
The Zoom technology has changed enough that the wind chimes are not as big. I think the ability for the microphone to pick up what's near you is better because they're not nearly as disturbing. But thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, everyone muting when we're not speaking makes a better experience on Zoom still, even with the technology improving. Okay.
Misheberach Avotenu Makor HaBaracha Lihimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach Imotenu Makor HaBracha Lavotenu. May those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Baruch atah
Baruch
Adonai
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Let's see. We're going to do a very small amount of reading. I know this doesn't go easily, but we're only going to read 3 lines. Vic, will you start us off with 17 through 19? Oh, you have to unmute.
Okay. Now, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and they return to Egypt, and then return to Egypt. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took with him the bones of Joseph, who had exacted an oath from the children of Israel, saying, God will sure take notice of you. Then you shall carry up my bones from here to you with you.
Thank you. 2 of the most important concepts that also bring today into the picture are right there in those lines, and I wanted to give them weight. The second one first, the concept of bringing the bones for burial. That is such an important concept in Judaism, that the power that Hamas had in holding on to the last hostage, though he was known to be dead the whole time, is something that the world doesn't understand. But as Jews, we understand that first of all, the idea of bringing bones for burial is the greatest kind of kindness you do for someone, because it's one that can never be reciprocated. You do it without ever the expectation of reciprocation. So that's sort of the highest form of a kindness. And also the idea of that how we're treated when we're dead gives an understanding, a window into the value we have as humans. So at the time of death, that ultimate act of kindness and honor and respect reflects on the honor and respect that we have for the human in their life and what we will carry forth in their memory with us. So I thought this was a very auspicious day to have that be, for me, that was felt like the most important line in the whole parashah today.
Interesting. Yeah, and interesting keeping Joseph's bones for that long is interesting. I mean, something to be noted.
Mm-hmm.
How many years had passed?
400, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah,
Right, because
400.
They
Oh,
said
that's what-
430 years from when Jacob brought the family down to Egypt until they left.
right, and then
Hmm.
Jacob's bones, but Jacob died earlier, and Joseph, this is Joseph's bones being carried.
Right.
So that would have been a few, because I think Jacob died 17 years after arriving, and I forget how many years later Joseph died, but there is a timestamp on that. I just don't remember it.
So
There's
a
an
few hundred
interesting
years.
interesting contrast in that there arose a time where the Pharaoh didn't remember, but guess what? They remembered that they had promised to bring Joseph's bone. It's this contrast between the two is very stark.
Yeah. And I'm going to pull up that line from Genesis. That is the line that's referred to. 47:29. That's the line that is mirrored, or should be. I didn't look it up. I just wrote it down from one of my
It was
notes.
Genesis 50, 24, 25.
See, I have 47:29. So let's see what 47:29 says.
24, 25. 50, 24, 25.
All right. Well, we have two different references. So in 47:29 it says, when Israel, which is Jacob, when Israel's time to die drew near, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have but found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh, faithful kindness, please do not bury me in Egypt. When I am laid to rest with my ancestors, carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And what's your reference? 50?
The
Right.
reference that Joseph says is 50, 24, 25.
Okay, so I'll look that one up because that's the one I needed. 50, 24?
24, 25.
Okay.
So who were they carrying, Jacob or Joseph?
The first one was Jacob. These are two different times.
And
The second
Oh,
was
okay. They
Joseph
carried them
then,
both out.
yeah. Joseph said to his kin, "I am dying, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up out of this land to the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph adjured Israel's children, saying, "God will surely take care of you. Bring my bones up from this place." Oh, thank you, Alan. I really don't mean for you to be constantly on call, wearing your beeper and pager and everything. So thank you. Yes, there it is. So it says, Pakod in line 25, Pakod ifkod Elohim etchem. It says, when God has taken notice of you, surely, Pakod ifkod, he surely will take notice of you. It's not a very good translation because Pakod ifkod, that repetition, is elevated. And it said, surely God will take notice of you and you will carry my bones from here. In other words, God is with you. There's no burden in it. Because, you could say, well, it's a burden. It could be a burden because we surely are introduced to a lot of whining in this chapter today already, the beginning of a lot of whining. So that surely God will be with you is an assurance. And it's, there's in all these little hints, there's the promise of a future, which we'll read in a few sentences about Miriam and the importance of Miriam carrying the drum through the sea. That idea that envisioning a future, it's a real act of faith to be so certain as to carry a drum for that event. So there's that one aspect. And then there's a whole greater discussion of the first line, which is the idea of the circuitous route and what that is all about. So I want to leave time. I think still year after year after year, to me, this parashah and its opening two lines feel like one of the most important lines in all of understanding the journey. So I want to leave
Before
time.
we leave this thing with the bones, I think it's pretty important to think about what the whole nature, given that this was a time period where basically it was just an oral tradition. Things weren't really written down, and yet here for 400 years, they remembered that there was this cave, the Machpelah, which housed the elders when they were interred. And it's amazing. That through line here is very powerful.
It is
I thought it
powerful.
was really
Oh,
interesting about, he was embalmed because it's not a Jewish practice anymore to do that. I don't know when they stopped doing that, but you got to bury him right away and not embalm him now.
he was buried. The embalming was for the purpose of being able to transport the bones later, right?
Right,
So,
but we don't do that anymore. We don't embalm at all. You can't
right.
put any embalming fluid in someone. Yeah.
Sure, but it was just the bones that were taken, not all the internal organs that had been preserved in embalming fluid.
Well, they used to use the ossuaries, which would dissolve the flesh and then bury the bones, right?
Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah.
But also wasn't Jacob's body was also embalmed in the Egyptian. That I remember that is in the text that
Yeah.
You following the Egyptian fashion
Right, and that there's
or
a
the
lot of
Egyptian
discussion
practice.
of there's in the time that he died, Joseph was a very revered person, and so the embalming was a way of the Egyptians showing reverence for Joseph. So there's a lot in that, but yes, and again, our stories happen in a time that is an actual time in history. I mean, they may be backwritten to give us a reason for the story and give us what the story is supposed to mean to us, but still, our ancestors did live in a time where there were other people. We were not, unique.
On that first line, though, Aviva, there seems to be a foretelling of what's going to happen over and over again over the course of the next 40 years of why'd you take us out of Egypt? Everything was great. We had fish, we had garlic, we had, and so from the very beginning, there is the concern or the expectation, at least, that the kvetching would be, let's go back to Egypt. Things were much better there.
Yep. Well, there's always that. That seems we are, our vulnerability of being human is a constant. I mean, and some may say are a part of the 40 years. The necessity for 40 years. Also, vis-a-vis the knowing where to bring the bones to burial at the Ma'arat Machpelah in the Machpelah cave does also tell us that the geography is not that vast. Right? The idea of getting from here to there in a few weeks' time versus 40 years is not about the distance. It's never about the distance.
Yeah, I always heard it that it was the intention of Hashem was that generation had the slave mentality and they wouldn't ever behave the way he wanted in freedom in the promised land. They had to get rid of that generation.
Okay, so let's all say the things that we've always thought or known or or learned recently about why the circuitous route? So Arnie shared his. That's one of the classic explanations.
Well, the idea that Moshe was had been there before during battle,
Huh.
fighting for the Egyptians.
That's an interesting one. Can you elaborate on that?
Um, just the way he acts is a real military way. He expects these military moves out of, you know, townspeople. And Moses kind of acts like he's been there before. And to fight a battle of that nature, he would be traveling up the coast with the Egyptians. And so he knows where he's going. And when he sends the spies, he goes, you know, you got, but he knows where he is, and but he's got to grin and bear it.
Okay. I have Matan, Sarah. Welcome, Sarah, and then Yuda. So go ahead, Matan.
Okay. Alter has an interesting comment here. He says there's an anachronism here. The timeline doesn't work. The Philistines weren't in, this would have been the Gaza Strip, what we call the Gaza Strip now.
Yep.
And the Philistines weren't there at the supposed time of the Exodus. So it wouldn't have been the land of the Philistines, but the Egyptians were going up into that area quite frequently to because the Bedouins were raiding the Egyptians, and they had a major fortification over around the Gaza Strip. So the first thing that the children of Israel would have encountered would be these major fortifications of the Egyptians, and that might have well, it probably would have discouraged them.
Yep. Thank you, Sarah.
Are you talking about the going into the Sea of Reeds, leaving Exodus?
Well, a
Or
little
you're
bit
talking about
later.
40 years in the desert?
We're not there yet.
We're not there, but we are
When
talking
you
about
say
that.
when you say circuitous route,
Yes.
what do you mean?
Well, the wording is that's exactly the wording. And if you translate the Hebrew, the idea of vaisov, let me just get the Hebrew right there. But in a lot of translations, it is called the circuitous route. And that's right there in the first line. Now, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although it was nearer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart, etc. So God led the people round about by way of the wilderness at the Sea of Reeds. So we haven't had that yet, but an indication is that that's the direction it's going to be. So yes,
So if he led them round about to the Sea of Reeds, my thinking is that it's because they had to go into the Sea of Reeds so that the Egyptians could chase them there and drown. And they had to know that God was behind this, that God was still protecting them, that it was by his hand, because that's all the plagues that had come in Egypt were showing them that God was behind them. I mean, this is according to what I'm seeing in the word. And so they still had to go through the Sea of Reeds.
yeah.
Now, I don't think we're going to see God, at some point, God is going to leave it up to them to fight their own battles. But at this point, it appears that he's still protecting them. And so this still needs to happen. They need to go into that sea so the Egyptians can follow them there and be swallowed up by it. And to
Vic
me, that
wants,
goes along with this, with all the plagues. Um, yeah.
Vic is going to respond to that, and then we'll move on to you. That looks like you have something direct to say to that.
Also, what it shows you is that Moses knew the territory. Moses grew up there. He knows what the tides are. He knows where to get good fish. He knows, all that stuff by just
Yeah.
growing up there.
Yeah, I
And so he
absolutely
just
agree.
says
Yeah.
that's I know a back way down the
Yeah.
alleys, and then
Yeah,
so
I totally agree with that. He probably knew that way, and that's the way he should lead them. Yeah.
Yehuda?
I'm not approaching it really from the standpoint of Moses at all. I'm thinking rather that who is this group of people who left Egypt? The whole struggle to get them to leave anyway. And that, we sort of acknowledge that a lot of the plagues had to do with convincing them to leave. It wasn't even convincing Pharaoh to let them go. And I don't think any of that has vanished. This is still a group of people who are tenuous at best in their commitment to continue forward. And therefore, considering that memory of travel is something that's very real, if you only give them supposedly, the length of time to walk from Egypt to the Gaza Strip is 10 or 11 days. If they decide, this tenuous group of people, that they don't want to do it, it's easy for them to go back. Versus if you force them into the wilderness in a way that is not easy to go back, that they don't have a sea that you would always keep on your left or on your right when you're traveling. Instead, there's unmapped regions that people don't know about, and it basically is confirming that they actually have to stay with the group or not get lost. Um, and at the same time, enforces the whole thing that there is a strength in being in the group too, versus deciding, I don't want to do this. I'm going back. It's easy. I'm just going back along the Mediterranean. I know exactly where to go, blah, blah, blah. I think that there's a lot of wisdom in dealing with the vacillations of a people who didn't want to leave in the first place.
Alan, do you want me to take the map down, or are you going to refer to it?
Oh, does no? I'm fine with it up. That's not a problem. But I wasn't looking at geography, more looking at the wording of that the line that we're or that section that we're talking about, where the translation is the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. But then the next line says, now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure about any notes on that, but I'm not sure if that's the direct translation. Is it Hamushim
Yep.
Alu
Do
B'nai
you want me to
Israel
read something,
Eretz
a
Yisrael?
commentary on that word? Here's a
Yeah,
commentary.
the armed. Why the word
Armed. The
armed as
meaning of
though.
Hamushim is not certain. The rendering is based on the Targum Onkelos. Rashi follows this, but also gives an alternative explanation. Hamushim means that 1/5 went out, 4/5 having died during the plague of darkness. The theme is that only a portion of the people left Egypt is found repeatedly in the Midrash, where traditions are recorded only that 1/50th or 1/500th went out. It is also possible that if Chamushim is related to Chamesh, 5, or Chamishim, 50, it may indicate troops of 5 or troops of 50, respectively. That is to say, Israel went out of Egypt like an organized army.
Right. So the term in military term, that is what it means. It means armed. Um, it's there's no it's not ambiguous in military terms what it means. But there
That's
has
modern
been,
Hebrew.
right. And in military language,
Right.
it's modern
It's
Hebrew
still modern
military
Hebrew,
language.
though.
Yeah. Uh, but you're right, Ellen, that there's a lot of anachronistic writing in here that it doesn't make sense in the context of just plain storytelling. that is, that's why there's so much, sometimes an entire Torah study is devoted just to these first few lines here.
People do you estimate? I understand you don't like prop.
Yeah, because it seems as though, as long as they were borrowing silver and gold, they could have borrowed some swords and spears if in order to be armed.
Arnie?
My image of the army going out is, it must have taken a tremendous amount of organization to move that amount of people. You had to bring with you, all kinds of supplies, tents and food and tools and everything. It's like organizing an army when you do that because it has, you know, a whole bunch of thought that has to go into it and tactical thinking.
I'm gonna
And
share
yet
the. Oh,
they
go
couldn't
ahead.
get their bread. They couldn't get their bread raised. They had to leave so quickly the bread wouldn't rise. So how much advance preparation could there have been?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just
I'm gonna share the map that Arnie put up again. And okay, is everyone seeing it? So the route is here. Okay, so the land of Goshen, right there where the Israelites were and multiplied greatly. And as Arnie said, if they had gone the direct route, they would have gone right up the coast. There's Gaza right there. Okay, and that would have taken but a few days, maybe a few weeks. And look how far. It's not just. It's literally a circle, and it's down to the depth of the desert. Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb are very far down in the Sinai Desert there. And then, all the stories follow and all the named places are along the way there. But it's not just a little bit of a circuitous route. It is deep into the desert, deep into the territory of having to have faith to get through it. It's the building of an understanding of a relationship that is, you have to see all those concepts that have come into modern usage, like the darkness before the dawn, and things have to get really bad before people will blah 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 realize. There's a lot of talk about what's happening today in our country and what it takes to bring people into the streets in sub-zero temperature and do that in massive amounts. That things, really have a term that I use. I described it to people the other day at services. There's a Hebrew term called Higiu Maim Ad Nafesh. Water has reached as far as it could. Water has reached the soul. A little bit more, and you would die. And that is the feeling that I think a lot of people are talking about. And when we put it biblically, this is what we're talking about. Water has reached that point of you have to do something or your soul will die. You will drown, your soul will die. Water has reached to the point of the soul. And I think it's very important. We don't read Torah in any time. We read Torah in our time. And it's very hard for me not to feel that synchronicity, since we're talking about asynchronicity.
Across this whole parashah, after reading it this morning, I'm thinking, not only were the Israelites not prepared to leave, God wasn't prepared either. He didn't know in advance that they were going to complain about this and complain about that, and he had to get them water and he had to get them food and all that. That was not part of his thinking as well, or her thinking as well.
That's why Moses was the guy to lead them. He was able to organize and had experience, and he would have gone south because the whole beach is fortified. You wouldn't be able to pass one of them. So yeah, what you said as well.
I will just read this short paragraph from Rabbi Danny Pressman's Torah Encounters. The midrash that says that God would, let's see, should not all the more have brought them by the straight road? But God said, if I bring Israel straight into the land now, every one of them will immediately take hold of his field or his vineyard and neglect the Torah. But I will make them go round about through the desert 40 years so that having the manna to eat and the water of the well to drink, they will absorb the Torah. So just another perspective. And he says, this midrash gives us an insight into God's plan and purpose for the Israelites. It's as if God took the Israelites on an extended training retreat to prepare them for their new assignment as a covenant people living in their land and governed by the Torah. A very long retreat, to be sure. Why is it necessary that the Israelites not go directly to their new land? What were the dangers of plunging immediately into conquest and settlement? Ooh. What contemporary or personal analogies suggest themselves? What current analogies suggest themselves? It's really, at any time, our ability to look at things going on in different parts of the world is limited, even more when it is us who are in the situation. Our ability is limited to look at ourselves.
11 days was not enough time to learn the rules of life.
Sarah?
Going along with that midrash, a lot of the Jews, the Hebrews that left Egypt were still very Egyptian culturally, and many of them didn't even want to leave. They wanted to stay in Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why were they sort of spared? Why were they taken on this circuitous route? Is because they had grace to receive the Torah later. If that makes any sense. Let me try to rephrase this a little bit differently. So if they, well, let me get back to that. I lost my train of thought on that, but basically why weren't they punished? Why weren't they left behind? It was because God knew that they were going to receive the Torah later. But in order to be prepared to receive the Torah, in other words, it's all predestined. It's not like God doesn't know. He's using Moshe to take them through this circuitous route. Even the bad Jews who didn't want to go, the ones who were still very Egyptian, who went, as you said, they had to be purified by their soul. But because this is a midrash, I'm not saying this. This is a midrash that I know. But because God knew that they would accept the Torah as a people later on, they had grace. They were still being protected. What I said before, they were still being protected. They were still being led via Moses, um, as Vic said, via Moses. So this soul purification could happen. But it's all because they were going to accept the Torah later on. So that's sort of a predestination view. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. It is another look at, because the question of going all the way back to the eating of the forbidden fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Once that happened, God can no longer direct people and make them think or act a certain way. Things have to be proven, and they can't be proven by magic. The magic aspect was to get them out of Egypt. Magic still has to play a part in the beginning of the journey because that's what the Israelites knew. Because they lived in a different culture where magic meant something. Magic meant,
Right. Right.
godliness.
Exactly. Right.
And so, as we see in the story, and we're going to go through a big chunk of reading next, there is that God understands that humans do have to arrive to knowledge on their own, and that is a very complicated process, and they have to arrive at that knowledge even when they're fearful, even when they're scared, even when they don't know where their next food is coming from.
Right. So when the Egyptians are chasing them, that's the scared. It's just, the Egyptians are ice, basically.
Yes.
And in a sense, yeah, the Egyptians are ice. And the other thing kabbalistically, um, the whole idea of going into the sea, the sea, the oceans, is a whole world underground. It's sort of like a hidden world underground, sort of like going down into your soul or into your body of what's hidden and bringing that up. So, Kabbalistically, I think the sea also represents the depths of the soul and that reaching down into the soul, grasping onto what's hidden in there, what strengths are hidden in there, what spirituality is hidden in there.
Yeah, the sea definitely is a place of a lot. Oh, Heather left. Okay. Anybody else want to comment on these lines before we move on? Okay, now we need someone with a lot of breath because I'm thinking we're going to go all the way through the splitting and the rejoining of the water. So who's got breath this morning? Alan, not you, because you have to read the Song of the Sea. I'm sorry. All right. Arnie, it's good for the lungs. It makes you deep breathe.
They set out from Sukkoth, obviously not the holiday, and encamped in Etham at the edge of the wilderness. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, and they might travel day and night. The pillar of cloud by day, the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp before Pi-haroth, before Migdol and the sea, before Baal Zephon, and you shall encamp facing it by the sea. Pharaoh will say of the Israelites, they are astray in the land, the wilderness has closed in on them. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his couriers had a change of heart about the people and said, "What is what we have done, releasing Israel from our service?" He ordered his chariot and it took his men with him. He took 600 of his picked chariots and the rest of the chariots of Egypt with officers in all of them. And the Lord stiffened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he gave chase to the Israelites as the Israelites were departing defiantly. The Egyptians gave chase to them, and all the chariot horses of Pharaoh, his horsemen, the warriors overtook them and camped by the sea near Pi-hahiroth, before Baal Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. And they said to Moses, "Was it want for graves in Egypt that you brought us out into the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt?" Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be, and we will serve in Egypt, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which your Lord will work for you today, and the Egyptians whom you will see today you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace. Then the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians, so they will go after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his warriors, his chariots and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am Lord, when I gain glory through Egypt, through Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. The angel of God, who has been going ahead of the Israelite army now, mowed and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up in place behind them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was the cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that no one could come near the other all through the night. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all that night, and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split, and the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians came and pursued after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. At the morning watch, the Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of their chariots, so they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm over the sea, and the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, and upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. Moses held out his arm to the sea, and at daybreak the sea returned to its normal state, and Egyptians fled at its approach. But the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that followed them into the sea, not one of them remained.
Sorry, I was saying Yishal Koach. Our choral director tells us that singing involves good deep breathing. So especially when you have a cold, it's a good thing to do because it makes you concentrate on your breathing and breathing deeper. So when you plan for a long sentence, you breathe deeply, and it's actually good for you. So there you go. There's one line that I think is very significant. Alan, you don't have to find it. I'm going to read it out of my translation. But Moses, it's line 13, but Moses said to the people, have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which Adonai will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. I have not read a lot of commentary about it, and it always surprises me because basically, there's this understanding that there will be other Egyptians. These you will not see again. But the idea that God will protect you for always by this one event is a fantasy. There will be others. And at that time, there won't be as many miracles because the Israelites will be that far removed from a culture that expected miracles, and they will have to rely on their own understanding of the world. Arnie?
So I just want to find out what you thought. Was the Pharaoh killed in this deluge also?
No, he was leading from behind. Here, come on, follow me while I stay on the shore and watch you. Ugh.
Okay.
And have we seen that? Do we know that model? Have we ever seen that before? Whereas in the Israeli army, the higher ups lead from the front, which is why in battles, more people in high ranks are killed than in most other armies. So that's a very important thing. This leading from behind is no leadership at all, apparently. And, we've experienced it not so long ago in our country as well. Alan?
Well, they know historically that that particular pharaoh was a weak pharaoh, that the whole economy of Egypt was going downhill historically in that period of time. And you had I can't remember, was it the Parthians or the Persians were gaining power? Can't remember. But the world is always changing, right?
Alan?
And Moses led from behind.
Well, Moses, yeah, we'll keep that thought for a little bit from now. Oh,
Okay.
Alan?
It seems from the text that Arnie just read that Moses had advanced knowledge of what was going to happen. Not just saying, God's going to get us out of this. God's going to get us out of this and do this, this, and this. So you'll never see these Egyptians again. And that's left out of the text. That's left for us to imply. But from what Moses' statement that you will see this wondrous thing happen, seems as though he knew what the plan was, instead of just being told, hold your staff up and watch what I do.
And yet 40 years is a slog, no matter how you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And Moses, for all his greatness, was a human as well.
That's really emphasized in the words.
In what way?
Well, he talks to people like he knows what they need to get. He, he knows how to make them kind of believe in him enough to leave town. He's, that, and he and he leads from behind, but that's the way they did battle then. So the guy that can see what's happening.
So Moses is not leading an army. That's just a very important distinction right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I do want to come back to this that you're saying, because that Moses is actually not leading an army. It's pretty specific, although I know historically, and especially as Yuda read from the idea of the word chamushim, that there's, allusion to the organizational structure of an army. But that's, I believe, this is my personal belief, that in this story, we are not meant to look at the Israelites as an army, because that's what Pharaoh did. The Pharaoh was enslaved the Israelites because he worried that there were too many of them, and because of how good they were at other things they did, that they could become a good army. Craig, you're muted. Oh, you have to unmute.
I was interested in the use of the word glory, that God said, I will gain glory, which suggests that maybe God has the human quality of vanity or being vainglorious, but maybe it means something else in terms of respect or justice. I'm thinking about the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is more a Christian song, I think. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. So I'm just curious about the use of this word glory. And I don't know what the Hebrew word is, but some of you do, and it just I hope God doesn't have an ego where he needs to be glorified.
Well, can you tell me which line? Is it a specific line you're talking about?
Yes, it says, I will gain glory through what I do to the Egyptians or prophets. Alan, maybe you can find it.
Yeah, I'll find
It's
it.
line 4,
Okay. In
14:4.
14:4. There, Alan is quicker than my little brain here. Then I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. So I'm seeing here, first of all, Matan put in the chat that kavod is the word for glory. Kavod is a word for glory. There are many words that imply glory. But I believe in this sentence that you were looking at, Craig, is that it is an indication that the people will see the falseness of the greatness of their Pharaoh. It's about the Egyptians. Because Pharaoh has had this sort of like, yeah, I'll let him go. Oh, no, I won't. Yes, I'll let him go. God hardens his heart. This whole thing, right? There's this big tug. But in the end, a leader is not a leader if he's got no followers. So the glory that it says here in line, it says, I will stiffen Pharaoh's heart and I will pursue them, that I may gain glory through Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Adonai.
Right, but just the word glory, it's just the root word of the word glorious, and it's gonna be a glorious situation when he kills thousands of Egyptians. And it just seems that it's more gory than glory when you think about the human toll. And God gains respect by killing so many people. Is it now Pharaoh will finally get it? Is that what it means?
Well, okay, so let's just talk language. The word that you're looking at is ichabda, and that comes from the root kavod. But in the oversimplified, very, very pshat translation, it says, I will make Pharaoh's heart heavy. Kaved is from the same root as kavod and as heavy. So they're both those implications are there for your own interpretation. And when God hardens Pharaoh's heart, it is to show his power over Pharaoh. And when Pharaoh hardens and weighs down Pharaoh's heart, he loses honor and glory in the eyes of his own people, of Pharaoh's own people. So there's definitely a lot there. There was a good pickup on that line, but I don't think that I would translate it as glory until I look at it in this way. Because yes, kavod, as Matan put in the chat, is usually the easiest translation.
Right, but it kind of suggests that God is a killer. I mean, he does drown the Egyptians, and it's not the first time he's drowned people, because we had Noah in the flood, and it seemed like God was a little remorseful about that, saying, I'm not going to drown people anymore. Or maybe it was just, I'm not going to drown Jews anymore. I don't know, or everybody. What do you do with him drowning people again after he said, that the Noah's flood, he wouldn't do that again?
Well, there's that whole midrash that I forget how it goes exactly, but it's something about the angels singing to encourage the Israelites to walk through the parting of the sea. And God scolds them and he says, you can't be cheering for the death of my own creatures. The Egyptians are also my own creatures. Does anyone remember this midrash? Something to that effect.
Yeah.
Right? So the I'm not going to go into modern parallels of people who die unnecessarily by the hands of people. People die by the hands of people. People don't die by the hands of God. These stories are there for a reason. And if you need to believe that it is the hand of God that caused the death of the Egyptians, for the purpose of the story, that's one thing. But to carry that, to say that that justifies the killing of innocent people in any situation, that is not what was the purpose of the storytelling. And it's a very nuanced view to be able to separate the two, because our stories are not, there's so many ways that they're disproven to be literal, right? There's scientific explanation for the parting of the sea. There's scientific explanation later on of sweetening the water by throwing wood into it. There's so much scientific explanation because as people, we have to move away from this notion that we believe in a God that tells us to kill people. So all the, the whole journey is that, get that out of your brain, that it is okay to just kill people. That was a God act. It was not a human act. And there's no rejoicing in it. So, I don't know, as an Israeli, I have to read these things very carefully because it's very easy to just lean back and say, well, see, it says so, right? Kill the enemies. And when we get to the Amalek part at the end of this chapter, it gets even more difficult. It's a laziness to justify human killing based on these stories that are so much more nuanced, I think. Oh, I'm ranting, sorry. Arnie, save me from my ranting.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I think that from the point of good storytelling, our people are to make the story interesting, it has to say God was on our side and he killed our enemies. I mean, it's just basic good storytelling, might makes right, or whatever you want to call it, So it wouldn't have been so good. They chased them up to the Red Sea, and Pharaoh supplied boats and rafts for them to cross, and they made it across, and they, waved goodbye from the other shore. I mean, come on, that's not going to last for generations, that story, right?
And the purpose of the different actions, the different components, what on earth would have been the reason for an Egyptian army to pursue the Israelites? In what way was there good in it?
They wanted to keep their slaves, it says.
Right, but what does that do? How does that advance humanity?
They were just following orders from behind.
That's why God needed to prove to the Egyptians, not to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Matan?
I see a lot of this as an ego thing. Pharaoh had to prove that he was more powerful, and that's why he had to send the chariots after it. From a cost benefit point of view, it makes no sense. They were more trouble than they were worth.
To this day.
But I do think Craig tapped into something that we've talked about before, and it'll come up later in these 40 years, later in the story, about appealing to God's vanity, saying, well, there's one point, I think, where Moses says, what are people going to think about you, about a God who lets his people die in the desert? You have to, the idea that God cares about what people think of him, or her, or them. And so this appealing to the vanity is also, I think we had something similar in Breshit, in negotiating over how many good people you'd have to find before,
right, in Sodom and Gomorrah,
not
right.
destroying. Sodom and Gomorrah. The idea that God cares about having his reputation besmirched. At least, or the least you can appeal to that sense of vanity.
Yes, I agree. I think the easier way for me to perceive a concept of God is that God is in the image of humans.
Doesn't it put into question also that God is timeless, rather that God is living in the present and is not actually exhibiting the understanding that he knows the future?
Maybe this is why God is so often characterized as male, because he appears to have an ego.
Or to think he has all the answers.
And won't ask for directions.
Boy, better watch out. God's listening to this conversation.
He knew what I was thinking before I said it.
Well, maybe not. If God lives in the present and is not omnipotent as suggested, doesn't know the future, and the future is yet to be revealed, is God timeless or not? That's the question.
Well, I have a different question. Was God warning Adam and Eve not to eat of the fruit of the tree of good and evil? The tree of knowledge of the good and between good and evil. I always have to say that whole thing because to me there's no meaning to the tree without saying all of that. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because everything was so perfect, even for God. He got to watch these beautiful creatures in a beautiful place. And did God want to spare God's self the agony of seeing all that could happen? Or did he want to spare the people he loved the agony of all that could happen? Either way, once it happened, it's not reversible. God could not undo that act of people, the humans, opening their eyes. That's done. So the idea, the struggle between understanding the human's quest for God versus God's search for man. That's an ongoing thing, and you see it in the conversation, and especially in the Hebrew, you see it more clearly in the mirroring of words, which is why I try to point that out when that happens, because it's very beautiful. And we'll have in chapter 17, there are a few lines that are almost exact usage later on in another parashah after the golden calf. So I love when I find these things, the year after year of reading it, it jumps out more off the page. And I find that it strengthens in me that concept that I like to believe, that that God is looking for us in the same way that we're looking for God. That's part of the relationship.
And here I thought God was all powerful. And if God didn't like what he created, then couldn't he just wipe out humanity and start over?
We have that in our story, but we also have the words that God says, I will never again. Right? We got the rainbow to seal that deal.
Right. But you're saying once Adam and Eve had knowledge of the difference between good and evil, then all humans would have that knowledge, and
Yep.
God can't do anything about it. And once God created everything, he's incapable of destroying it that he created.
Well,
Amongst some people, there's an understanding that that God does not actually affect human beings at all, but only nature, which might beg the question that God is nature. But we have, as Ruth Ellen's not here today, but Ruth Ellen is very much a proponent of free will and free choice. And if God does not affect people, but just nature, then the free will and free choice, leads us in one direction or the other, depending on what we decide to do and the consequences thereupon.
Right.
God has zero control over that. It's all up to us.
Well, zero is a pretty big number. And where God resides is a concept that is going to be debated till the end of time. Because if you want to understand that God resides within you and that God is infinite, then there is no such thing as zero. So, for example, and I used this example a few weeks ago, I don't remember the context, we were talking about the idea of acts of God being a justification for insurance companies not to cover something, right? Acts of God. Well, the acts may be of God, but the response is all human. So that is a human saying, I'm going to be lazy and just hide behind the concept of God. I'd rather make my millions than pay out. So I'm just going to claim God. That is exactly the opposite of what God intends for us to do. There is no hiding behind. That's why all this shedding, and who gets the mikveh? Who gets the cleansing in the water? The Israelites walk through dry land. Who gets washed of the concept of that they have a God that's more powerful than the gods of the Israelites? It's the Egyptians. So, this is like, I am glad to never resolve these things, because if we ever feel like we've resolved any of these issues, woe to humanity, right? It's the constant clarifying and asking yourself, do you really believe this? Do you really believe there's a God that says, if the color of your skin is so and so, then all bad things accrue to you, and if the color of your eyes is so and so, all good things accrue to you? It's a tough way.
What you just said about the Egyptians, there's this whole set of commentaries that have to do with, in contrast to the Song of the Sea, that there was no rejoicing on God's part about the Egyptians dying, because the Egyptians are also made in the image of God as well. And that we never have permission to, celebrate at the horribleness of other people's suffering. That's not something we do. We actually show compassion for everybody, even people that we struggle to show compassion for, like he who shall not be named.
Sarah has her hand up.
So there's this original condition. This is another midrash, an original condition by what came first. So you have the sea, and there's this word kadam, or which the vowels can be switched around to kedem. So instead of Kadem, Kedem, which means what came first. And so one of the midrash says that Hashem said that at some time, well, first of all, the idea is that the world is constantly being created by Hashem. That if Hashem ever stopped creating, it would all go away. So whatever the original source or power is, or light, whatever it is that creates the world, is constantly recreating it every minute, every second, or it would disappear. So on that premise, at the beginning, Hashem says, oh, I'm going to have to at some point go against nature. And the parting of the sea is that going against nature. So, I mean, there's two different ways to look at it. Some people think it was just an act of nature, like these winds, these east winds just came up and they just happened to arise. It's a phenomena. And then the other one is that actually Hashem actually made those winds blow, made the walls of the sea go up, I think there's, I know I've heard in the past that the walls of the sea were a mile high. I don't know if that's true, but that they were very, very high. So, I mean, it depends on how you want to look at it. If you want to believe in these kind of miraculous events that happened, or if you just want to say it was, oh, yeah, the Sea of Reeds dries up every once in a while and the people, crossed, and then there was a flash flood and everybody got drowned. But this particular idea where the vowels in this word are changed, kadem, it goes back to the original condition, which would have been the sea, how it normally is with water and raging and everything. And then this idea that it was Hashem that went against nature and parted the sea where in a way that it wouldn't have been parted before. I mean, let's think about it in terms also of the 7 plagues. And I think when we discussed this, I said, like if you kill all the frogs that eat the lice, then the lice are going to come. So you could think of it as one plague kind of leading into another and causing another, or you could think of it as Hashem actually bringing this and doing this. And then part of this is the idea that later on you are not going to see these miracles anymore because they're not necessary. Miracles are going to look different. And God's going to not keep fighting for the Hebrews. They're going to have to at some point fight for themselves. Again, this idea of purification, of building up courage, of making the people ready for the battle. To go into not only to accept the Torah, but to go into the land of what is it, Canaan at that time? I guess Canaan. What was it called at that time? It wasn't called Israel, so it was called Canaan, I think, right?
Yeah.
Canaan, yeah. Anyway, okay, that's it.
Matan. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah. Okay. There was a major eruption in the Eastern Mediterranean in about the 14th century, about the same time as supposedly the Exodus, in an island called, in Greek, it's called Thera, in Italian, it's called Santorini. It was a huge earthquake, and it may have caused earthquakes and so forth. That I've heard that linked to the Sea of Reeds, but I don't see any need for that. I think we just have to see this as mythic truth.
Mythic truth. I've never heard that combination of words before.
Love that.
Well, it's a myth that's there to teach something. We have to figure out what.
Yes.
Yeah.
Arnie? You are also muted.
Since, I continue to believe this is just great storytelling, you incorporate all these dramatic effects, and the greater the drama, the greater the story, and the greater the remembrance of it. Let's say instead there was an alternative history. God took them up through Gaza and destroyed the Philistines. That's a pretty short story, and just one more battle that we've heard about, but creating, this whole 40-year story with all these miracles. I mean, we haven't even gotten to the manna yet, and all these other things, um, makes it a big mitzvah, it's like a fabulous story. That's my
I
point.
wanted to go back to what Sarah brought up, the Hebrew word kedim and kadim. So the root is the kedim or kadim. And kadim implies moving forward, progress.
Kadima.
Kedem is what came before. Kedem is also, well, I'll leave that one out. When we return the Torah to the ark, and we sing the Etz Chaim Hi, the last line is Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, renew our days as of old. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. The concept of backward-looking versus forward-looking is very, very important, and I think that the danger of looking backwards in order to go back is dangerous, but looking backwards in order to move forwards, that is a very important concept to me. And that's what in those words, that's what I believe. That's why we have stories. That's why I think it's okay to think that some of the stories were written later. They were written to fill in exactly that notion, which here in this parashah, at least twice already, the Israelites say, what, we had it better in Egypt, even with slavery. Right? This idea of there is no going back. It's just not possible. The only way is forward. Moving back is never an option. It's never a good thing when people try to. So the word kedem is very, very important. It also gives us a geographical understanding. Kedem is referred to as east, where the sun came up. But kedem is both backwards and forwards, depending on where you put the nikud, the vowel soundings. And I think, Sarah, that's a very important thing to bring up. And it's very important to remember, because remembering the past is not going back to the past.
It's also a good wine.
Yeah, it's a good wine. Yeah. All right,
And
Alan, are
grape
you
juice.
refreshed? Oh.
Here he goes.
Do you have some honey? Do you have a... Okay.
That was actually whiskey.
Whiskey with honey.
Pineapple juice. Pineapple juice.
Okay. Even better.
There's an apocryphal tale about W.C. Fields, who had a thermos of whiskey on his movie sets, but they called it pineapple juice, and some poor assistant filled it with pineapple juice once, and he took a swig of it and said, "Who put pineapple juice in my pineapple juice?" But
all right,
anyway,
carry us through. Actually,
I digress.
2 lines beyond. You're going to read the Song of the Sea and the 2 lines about Miriam.
Okay.
So you can ask, where did they get a drum in the desert?
They borrowed it. Let's see. Then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to the Lord. They said, "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and might. He is become my deliverance. This is my God, and I will enshrine him, the God of my fathers, and I will exalt him. The Lord, the warrior, Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has cast into the sea, and the pick of his officers are drowned in the sea of reeds. The deeps covered them. They went down into the depths like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Your right hand, O Lord, shatters the foe. In your great triumph you break your opponents. You send forth your fury. It consumes them like straw. At the blast of your nostrils the waters piled up. The flood stood straight like a wall. The deeps froze in the heart of the sea. The foe said, I will pursue, I will overtake, I will divide the spoil. My desire shall have its fill of them. I will bear my sword, my hand shall subdue them. You made your wind blow, the sea covered them. They sank like lead in the majestic waters. Who is like you, O Lord, among the celestials? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders? You put out your right hand, the earth swallowed them. In your love you lead the people you redeemed. In your strength you guide them to your holy abode. The peoples hear, they tremble. Agony grips the dwellers in Philistia. Now are the clans of Edom dismayed, the tribes of Moab trembling grips them. All the dwellers in Canaan are aghast. Terror and dread descend upon them. Through the might of your arm they are still as stone. Till your people cross over, O Lord, till your people cross whom you have ransomed. You will bring them and plant them in your own mountain, the place you made to dwell in, O Lord, the sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands established. The Lord will reign forever and ever. For the horses of Pharaoh with his chariots and horsemen went into the sea, and the Lord turned back on them the waters of the sea. But the Israelites marched on dry ground in the midst of the sea. Then Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her in dance with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." Then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but
Ellen,
I'm going into something else. Another water story. Yeah.
Which is appropriate because the name Miriam is it's hard to know where to stop but you know, we had to have the dramatic reading. So
Okay.
interesting thing, Miriam has not been named yet. This is the first naming, and she's not just Miriam; she's Miriam the prophetess. So this is, you know, it's very significant. And it almost feels like it was a backfill to clarify that she was there too, and all the women. And it's yeah, I mean, the idea that there is a need to have that be a very central part of this part of the story moving on forward.
And she's also identified not as Moses' sister, but as Aaron's sister.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
In the text.
Don't you consider that the whole the whole song itself is as you call it, a backfill, because it's referencing things that haven't even happened yet. So therefore, the people who wrote it actually knew that it happened already and are putting it in now.
I understand this is one of the oldest portions of the whole Torah, this poem.
Well, just the 2 lines of Miriam are considered very, very old.
Actually,
And Moses gets the lines first. Yeah. Miriam is basically repeating what, at least the early part of what Moses says.
You then I read an interesting explanation on the whole idea of how this song was recited, and I don't remember all the details. I don't know, maybe you can elaborate on it better. But the first few words, then Moses and the Israelites sang this song to Adonai. How did they all know it together? And what does it actually mean that they sang it together? Did he say the first line and then everybody repeated it verbatim, or did he sing a line and they all said amen? Right, there's a lot of, it was pretty fun reading that. I don't know how much it enlightened me, but it was fun to understand that this concept that the Israelite, they all knew something together, even though they understood it differently, yet then the line about Miriam is very straightforward.
I would love to hear at least some of this poem in Hebrew, if Aviva wouldn't mind, because I understand it's supposed to be, you know, so poetic in its, you know.
Well, you know, part of it, Micha Mocha is in here.
Yeah.
Right. There are a number of lines here that have made it into the liturgy.
But, you know, the reality is this is really the first time that the Israelites have ever prayed together.
Yeah. Right, and that is actually this. So this, I'll read a few lines in Hebrew. I don't know what it will do for you, but Alan, as long as you have the English up there. So yeah, go back to. I'll just read like through line 6 or 7. אז ישיר משה ובני ישראל את השירה הזאת לאדוני ויאמרו לאמור. אשירה לאדוני כי גאו גאה, סוס ורוחבו רמה בים. This is the line that Miriam repeats, by the way. At the end of this, she repeats this line. Azi v'zimratya vayhi li shua. That's another line. In English, it is, the Lord is my strength and might, he has become my deliverance. That is also in other, I believe, like in modern Orthodox, they sing this, Ahazi vezimratya vayhi lishua, as a chant, over and over and over again, and it just becomes a chant. Okay, so Ze Eli ve'anvehu Elohei avi ve'aromimnehu. Adonai ish milchama, Adonai shmo. מרכבות פרעה וחילו ירה בים, ומבחר שלישיו טובעו בים סוף. תהומות יחסיומו, ירדו במצולות כמו אבן. That line 5, the deep covered them and they went down into the depths like stone, is repeated in different, in a different, there's something about, okay, I can't find it quickly enough, but that line is repeated, that same idea of the water completely covering and going down as if pulled down by the weight of a stone. Anyhow, I will tell you that it's not an easy thing to read in Hebrew. It might sound poetic, but it is not poetic. There are harsh words in here. There are violent words in here. I don't find it very beautiful to read in Hebrew. I actually prefer to read it in English because understanding, the images are so harsh. I think the translation is a little more gracious.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I find it real interesting about the description of the ecstatic dancing, and
that's later. That's in the Miriam part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the ecstatic dancing kind of reminds me, well, the Hasidim do it, but also the Sufis and other cultures do it, and we don't see too much of it in traditional Judaism anymore. And I wonder why they cut that out, and I never had experienced it in the synagogue I went to.
So let me hold off on that thought for a minute, but I just want to tell you how you just enlightened me in a way I never, something I didn't understand until you brought it up. By having the very bare 2 or 3 lines about Miriam and the woman coming out and dance and song, I think that they were doing what I'm doing, which is, I don't like those lines, they're really harsh. Something really significant happened here. We should rejoice over it. So let's do it differently because those words, they weren't that fun. Let's put a different spin on it. I never really thought about that way till you brought that up with dancing. So, okay, so that's just me feeding off of somebody else's comments right there.
There's a song that Kathy Mattea made famous that has this line about the stones sinking down, except she references it. That's love.
Okay, so I forgot where I was at. I'm going to be quiet for a minute. I've lost my train of thought and I'm talking too much anyhow. Ruth Ellen, welcome.
So did any of you ever have the ecstatic dancing going on in Shul? Or was it only my dull synagogue that I went to?
No, we used to have some people that would dance on occasion, like Vivian would dance in the back sometimes.
Okay, thank you, Arnie. The reaction, so there's always a reaction to things when people think they've gone too far. So the reactionary aspect of Judaism in a certain period of time during the Enlightenment period, where Jews were actually semi allowed to incorporate into the countries they were living in and developed ways of being a little less obviously Jewish, a little less offensively Jewish, that led to a reaction. And that reaction was a beginning of a different form of Judaism that was worn on the outside, i.e., looking very much different from the rest of society, whether it's the black coats or the long peot or something that was very obviously presented outwardly as a Jew. You didn't have to wait till people discovered that about you inwardly. That particular period of time also led, I believe, to the idea that women should not sing in public. It all kind of came together. A lot of things came together at a very specific time, and it was a reaction to it's looking a little too much like the cultures of the nations we're living in. We're becoming a little too Egyptian. So ecstatic dancing remained in the realm of men for a long time, and women were excluded from it, at least publicly. Like they couldn't be seen doing it. Does that answer a little bit?
I guess, yeah. I didn't know. What do I know?
Well, that's what it's, going to the Museum of the Jewish People in Israel, the Anu Museum, is very enlightening in that way because it has actually explanations of just individual times in history where certain things became what we now recognize and where their origin is. Whether it's true or not, who knows? But it isn't plausible explanations, and that's one that I picked up from there. And it's part of what renewal has sought to distill to keep the joy, the Hasidic style joy of Judaism, but not be exclusionary. So to me, that's a lot of what renewal is about. It's, modern Hasidism that does not exclude half the population in its essence. Someone had a hand up, but I don't see it. Ruth Ellen, we just finished reading the actual Song of the Sea and then 2 lines following that about Miriam. So I'll just repeat that this notion of Miriam already going on the journey with a drum showed her innate hopefulness and idea of faith in a future, that she carried it, knowing there would be a time and place to use it. Whereas the Israelites who borrowed the jewels from their neighbors did it because they were told to do it. Because there would be some notion of maybe reparations or whatever it was something they were told to do, whereas Miriam on her own brought that whole female vibe of there is a future with her through the journey, through the crossing of the sea. Ooh, there are a lot of comments. We should look and see. Okay. Okay, so from Alter, this is from Matan. One surmises that she, Miriam, is called prophetess because the singing and dancing are an ecstatic activity, and one of the established meanings of the Hebrew term for prophet is an ecstatic who typically employed dance and musical instruments to induce the prophetic frenzy. Okay, and then Matan also writes that Kol Isha, the voice of a woman. With modern music reproduction, even the Hasids have relaxed this by incorporating intent. That is, if a Hasidic man hears Shania Twain from a cafe he passes by on the street, that is okay because he had no intent to hear a woman singing. You could choose the streets you travel on. Yes. Okay. Anyone want to move on? I mean, we always can go back to anything that came before. Ruth Ellen. Since you're nice and fresh. So Alan, go back one line there, okay?
Let me hide the closed captioning so I can see the whole thing.
Okay.
So we're at line 20?
Line 22.
Okay. Then Moshe caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went into the wilderness of Shur. They traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. That is why it is named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moshe, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There he made for them a fixed rule, and there he put them to the test. He said, "If you will heed the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in his sight, giving ear to his commandments, and keeping his laws, all his laws, then I will not bring upon you any of the diseases I brought upon the Egyptians, for I, the Lord, am your healer." And they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there beside the water. Setting out from Elim, the whole Israelite community came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moshe and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death." And the Lord said to Moshe, "I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them, to see whether they will follow my instruction or not. But on the sixth day, when they apportion what they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amounts they gather each day." So Moshe and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "By evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you should grumble against us? Since it is the Lord," Moshe continued, "who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full, because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moshe said to Aaron, "Say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling." And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud appeared the presence of the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moshe, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I, the Lord, am your God." In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moshe said to them, "That is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." This is what the Lord had commanded: gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, an omer to a person for as many of you as there are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent. The Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moshe said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they paid no attention to Moshe. Some of them left of it until morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank, and Moshe was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, each as much as he needed to eat, for when the sun grew hot, it would melt. On the sixth day, they gathered double the amount of food, 2 omers for each. And when all the chieftains of the community came and told Moshe, he said to them, "This is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a holy Sabbath of the Lord. Bake what you would bake and boil what you would boil, and all that is left put aside to be kept until morning." So they put it aside until morning, as Moshe had ordered, and it did not turn foul, and there were no maggots in it. Then Moshe said, "Eat it today, for today is the Sabbath of the Lord. You will not find it today on the plain. 6 days you shall gather it. On the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Yet some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moshe, "How long will you men refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? Mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you 2 days' food on the sixth day. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no one leave his place on the seventh day." So the people remained inactive on the seventh day. The house of Israel named it manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and it tasted like wafers and honey. Moshe said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let 1 omer of it be kept throughout the ages, in order that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out from the land of Egypt." And Moshe said to Aaron, "Take a jar, put 1 omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord, to be kept throughout the ages." As the Lord had commanded Moshe, Aaron placed it before the pact to be kept. And the Israelites ate manna for 40 years, and till they came to a settled land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. The omer is a tenth of an ephah.
So
I always love the
another
accounting, final
very,
accounting.
very great example of the anachronistic nature of this storytelling. We haven't been told about Shabbat yet.
No kidding. Well, I think this whole parashah actually, every bit of it smacks of having come back and revisited. I mean, every part of it. I'm from the Song of the Sea to the very first 3 lines, all that, which is also anachronistic too. Every bit of it. I think that I think that the Parsha is attributed to a conglomeration of all the writings, though, as well. All the various writers as well. The 4 writers are also represented throughout it.
That I think that really jumps out in the part that Ruth Ellen just read, where he said that Moses says, "If you will heed the Lord your God diligently, doing what is upright in His sight, giving ear to His commandments."
Yeah.
Commandments? What commandments? We didn't get any commandments yet. And keeping all His laws. Laws? What laws? We're just a bunch of people who are wandering in the desert right now.
So that is mirrored language. So in all the parts in our Saturday morning Siddur, the paragraphs that follow the Shema and the Ve'ahavta, that's the language. If you, then I. If you do this, then this will happen. And this is the great examples to me of this idea that the consequences are in the hands of humans. The listening part is, it's way too early right here to be talking about it. You're right. Like, where did this come from? We haven't even, like, what's a mitzvah? We don't know. The language here doesn't make sense. But the concept that it goes back to humans. The actions that are taken. So if God says, only gather or Moses says, only gather what you need to eat, and the Israelites have no faith, and they say, we better take a little extra, because we don't know, and it rots in the morning. It's the beginning of that sort of thing is, it's about listening, but who are you listening to? Like, where does God reside? It is about listening, but not blindly following. Listening and blindly following are not the same thing. And this is sort of the beginning of that conversation. You're right, it hasn't been mentioned yet. A number of things here way out
I'll
of
put it
sequence.
on the front porch.
Hilda, you are mute. I'm going to mute you. Okay, go ahead, Arnie.
So where else have we heard the term mana? And how is it significant to us living in Hawaii? It's interesting, these linguistic connections through different civilizations and stuff.
Ruth Ellen?
Yeah, I have to keep going back to this, and I seem to go back to it more and more every year. Whatever was, always was, and ever will be. There was a Shabbat at the creation of the earth. There was intuition. We could talk even about it in the idea for the Noahic code. Maybe there was some concept of a Sabbath. I think Moshe in his heart knew. I think the prophets knew. And I think on some level, all the Israelites knew because they were there. We were all there. So it's this whole timelessness, the quantum mechanics of it all, that says it. And then on top of that, just in the pragmatic way, this was written down after the fact, the anachronistic part of it that Yehuda talked about, so we know over and over again, it's like they're giving us little hints because we know the end of the story, so to speak. But more and more, I also see that it's an internal thing, and it's something that's carried in our bones and in our energy and in our DNA, so that on some level, this was always known. It just gets forgotten in the heat of the moment when people start focusing on their physical needs and start griping. If they stop and look inward, they're going to recognize. And then when you think it's the human nature part, of course, and when they got Mount Sinai and the Israelites said, oh, right away, they said, yes, we're going to do all this stuff. We're going to do all this. And then how soon we forget, but that's why we do it over and over, because we're human and we have to keep being constantly reminded, sadly.
Yoda, you are muted if you wanted to say something.
It's just a way of living in the present.
Yeah, that's true too. Don't worry about tomorrow. But then that's also the faith elements of all of that we come back over and over again, that the Israelites just can't, for more than a millisecond, accept that before they start worrying about their immediate needs. So we have this is the first time, and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Which was, I remember like somebody like Pat Robertson or whatever, where they all talked about the New Agers and all that, because people are saying we're part of God, we're part of the whole thing, and they see it as a separate hierarchy of everything being over everything else. But, excuse me, I lost my train of thought for a minute. But to aspire to be the best human being we can be, to have that communion, what the Hindus call the yoga, which is the communion, and have an immediate personal experience with what's God or whatever the great creator is. And I reckon that to, again, like what they talk about in Musar, with the commandment, be thou holy as I, the Lord your God, am holy. And that's consolidating what we have to do to live in the presence sufficiently to maintain that higher energy, so that we can recognize that the things that seem like burdens are really gifts, like the Sabbath, which is more and more what I'm trying to get myself into, but it's tough. It takes energy and it takes attention, but that's the goal.
Viv and I were talking about this the other day, that there are a lot of people who want to come be invited to Shabbat dinner at our house. And when they come, they just, and it's not just Jews. People want to come to Shabbat dinner at our house because they like the ritual or whatever it is that they like. But the reality is, you don't have to be Jewish to do Shabbat. When I was younger, I had a family I was very close to in Connecticut, and they did a Sunday dinner every single Sunday. They went to church, and then they had a big family dinner. And that one room in the house was really only used for that and for like Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner. But that was the Shabbat room for them. It just was on Sunday. And I think that anybody can actually choose to do that. If you're a part of the three religions of the book, you can choose to do Sabbath.
What's the term? Even more than the Jews have kept the Shabbat has kept the Jews. The rhythm of life is such that there needs to be recharge time. And recharge time is not so much about quitting, it's about choosing to do something different with that time. And we know that now about the human brain, that when we perseverate over something that we can't resolve, we don't resolve it. It's only when we put it to rest that actually can we resolve it. A lot of people describe the experience of like going swimming and coming out feeling like, oh, they just resolved something that they didn't think they could resolve. That's because we're using the different parts of our brain and we're giving a break to the part that just keeps swirling, swirling, swirling. So as humanity, all people, it's good for all people to have that break. That in times of enslavement, when people don't have agency over their own lives and they don't have that built-in ability to take a break, bad things happen. People start fighting more. It's needed by everybody and animals, by the way, because later when we'll come to the concept of Shabbat, the beasts of burden get to rest on Shabbat as well.
I would pose that, Aviva and I have built our whole marriage around having Shabbat. We don't miss it. We've done it for 40 something years. And luckily we both wanted to do it from the very beginning. I remember the first conversations we had about it after our honeymoon ended and we landed at a farm in Kentucky, and we had a conversation about that we needed to actually get used to, even though we were both brought up in families that did it, but we ourselves were creating our own family, and that we needed to get used to doing it so that by the time we had children, it would just be a normal thing. I remember having this conversation in the shed. Do you remember it, Viva?
Yeah, of course. Arnie?
I was just thinking this is the first mention of Jews organizing a labor movement.
And what are some of the most important things that labor movements have done for the worker?
Shabbat.
Yeah. And if you have to, in my work years, I hated to delve into the lecture and remind nurses what their life would be like if it wasn't for the unions. Because the first and most important thing that the nursing union has done for nurses is to remind them of how hard the work is, and that you cannot be mandated to work more than a certain amount. And if you're asked to, you should be well compensated. It is the most basic concept in the nursing union. That is the most important concept. And I got tired of reminding fellow nurses who, became kind of all the rage to blame the union for everything. But they wouldn't have been nurses without there being unions. They would never have chosen that profession. So, yeah. The greatest gift of the Jews to humanity is Shabbat. And here it's mentioned as if it's just presumed, like, oh, we already knew it, and in a sense we've always known it, which goes back to the concept of Sinai, because the whole concept of being there at Sinai it's circular. It doesn't have a beginning or an end. It means that we always were, in essence, even before the formal gathering, just by virtue of being a part of a people.
It also created the recipe for chunt.
Do you want to describe what that is?
Well, you start cooking for the Sabbath meal before Sabbath. And you have this, I guess you'd call it a stew, cooking on low. so that when you come home, after Saturday services, you got something to eat. You didn't have to cook it. It's sitting there, cooking on the stove, and it probably has beans and lentils and some meat or chicken or whatever in it, different recipes. Um, but it was all always what we call a Michael.
And it's a very significant one because the concept of if you, the all the stories written about the oh, what's that classic children's story? Stone soup. The idea that whatever you have, you put it all together and you infuse it with thyme, and with thyme, not THYME, but thyme. And then you infuse it with a little bit of yourself. So love, right? Love goes into cooking and it really sustains you. And there is no recipe for it. It is poor man's food that everyone can create. If you look at the variety of what cholent means in different cultures, there is no recipe, but it usually includes what was to be found in that time and place. Never, you didn't have to go shop for special ingredients. You didn't have to, you know, acquire specifically expensive ingredients for it. None of that. It was just what you had put all together with a good measure of love and time and heat. And
in an Orthodox home in Israel, most people cook with propane. And there's a particular metal sheet that you place on the stovetop with a small little hole in the middle. It's called a blech. And this hole has a fire that's lit for all of Shabbat. So you don't have to light it. You light it in advance of Shabbat, and that keeps all the metal top warm. Of course, it's a wonderful, place for bacteria to grow. And yet the blech is used in any Orthodox house. You'd walk into the house and you'd see the stove is covered with a big metal sheet.
I will say that long before Louis Pasteur discovered the optimal temperature for pasteurization, keeping food warm like that did not cause a mass food poisoning. It was above that temperature. So,
Yeah, the difference between blech and brech is the temperature.
all right, well, some of you know that I'm leaving in a few minutes because, well, I'll have to check the email. Maybe I can leave at 12:45. But in any case, I'm leaving at some point. So if anyone's invested in our storytelling reading to the end, let's do it and then open conversation. Who hasn't read or hasn't read enough? Because Vic only got 2 lines. I think Vic should read.
Do that.
All right.
Okay. Let me get this
And
closer.
you're going to take us to the end. It's not very much.
Okay. From the wilderness of sin, the whole Israelite community continued by stages, as the Lord would command. They encamped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moses. "Give us water to drink," they said. And Moses replied to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you try the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and livestock with things?" Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? Before long they will be stoning me." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take along the rod with which you struck the Nile, and set out. I will be standing there before you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and the water will issue from it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. The place was named Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and because they tried the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord present among us or not?" Amalek came and fought with the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Pick some men for us and go out and do battle with Amalek. Tomorrow I will station myself on top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand." Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Then, whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, but whenever he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. Moses' hands grew heavy, and so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur, and one on each side, supported his hands. Thus, his hands remained steady until the sun set. And Joshua overwhelmed the people of Amalek with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Joshua. I will surely blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." And Moses built an altar and named it Adonai Nissi. And he said, it means hand upon the throne of the Lord. And the Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages. Good.
Matan puts in the chat the staff with which you struck the Nile, take in your hand and go. Look, I am about to stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out from it, and people will drink. Okay, did you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I find this verse interesting because later on, it's a big no-no to strike the rock.
Yes. Well, the same staff.
A different rock.
Different rock, different circumstances, different mood. But
different directions.
Because what the word later on that you're looking for is vayach, and it is actually struck, which is the same word as hitting someone. And here I think the word is, I have to look in the Hebrew, but it's bring your rock toward the rock, like point to the rock with your, it's not quite as severe. But also the staff, we have the use of the staff and what you do with it in the idea of the first supposed proof to Pharaoh, right? The staff turning into a snake. So the wording is similar there. I highlighted, I'm trying to see why I highlighted, and I wanted to talk about lines 4 through 7. So let me just share with you guys why I did that, if I can find it. It is mirroring of words. So in the English, then Adonai said to Moses, pass before the people, take with you some of the elders, and take along the rod with which you struck the Nile, and set out. I will be standing there before you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and the people will drink. So later in parashah Ki Tisa, there's the scene of again, you know, after the golden calf and Moses being exasperated, and God says, look, go to this little nook in the rock, and I will pass before you, the same words in Hebrew. And I will pass before you, and you will see the back of me, because nobody sees my face and survives. And so same wording is used here. Moses is doing something enigmatic that the people will somehow because to believe, to have faith, right? He's lifting them out of a place where they've again said, why'd you bring us here? We're going to die of thirst, you know?
Well, God is also being enigmatic, because what does it mean when God says, I will stand before you? Can you see me?
Right.
I mean, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I wanted to point out the similarity of language. Alan?
Well, I found it a little odd that Joshua is just presented. He's introduced, but he's not introduced. Later, we're going to learn who he is and who his father's name is, and he's going to be involved with a lot of what's going on. And of course, he's going to become the next leader. But here he's just presented, and Moses said to Joshua, "Go, tell the people this or whatever." Like, who, what, where'd Joshua come from?
And that is another example of this, which parashah is rife with, of the lack of chronology and the backfilling of the story, because the purpose of the story is more important than the chronology. And maybe it was just so that we will forever have to sit and wonder about these things, and we don't ever get to a point where like, okay, we're done. We figured it out. We put this puzzle together. Now we can hang it on the wall and just look at it.
It also goes with the food, the manna and the quail, because later on there's an episode where people are complaining they don't have enough meat, and so they're given so much quail that it's coming out of their noses, and they're disgusted with it. But there was no mention of anything other than manna up until that point, except here where it said manna in the morning and quail in the evening. Which I know I can just imagine they come home from a walk in the desert and say, "What's for dinner? Quail again?" It's just like every night quail, every morning manna. But later the quail becomes an issue that's raised as kind of a be careful what you ask for or what you wish for.
It is that definitely, because the term in the Hebrew is like till it comes out of your nose, basically, like till, just like you've had so much. But the idea of food being something you do for pleasure, that is 40 years away.
I think we should mention the name Her. Her is this is the first introduction to this other very important person. Both Joshua and Her are the ones who hold up
Yes.
Moses' hand, and
Oh, right, yeah.
Her is the father of Caleb. One of the spies who was okay, and he's also the grandfather of Bezalel, who was the supreme artist to build the tabernacle. So that Her represents a very, very important family, also from the family of Judah, from the tribe of Judah.
I also read an interesting comment on the idea of Moses having to have his arms supported because he was so tired. That story is there to remind us that he was not ambivalent to the suffering of the people. He put himself in a situation that was physically uncomfortable, and it's a form of it's meant to show us that the empathy part is very important.
It reminds me of Dr. Strangelove.
Same. And Ben-Hur. Yeah, we have that too.
The son of Hur, right?
Yeah, a member of her clan.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure there's a joke in there about what's your pronoun, her, or. But the introduction of Amalek too, because later it's going to be held up as this the symbol of the worst of the worst, of the most evil evil foe. And here it's just kind of thrown in there of Amalek showed up and they went out and fought them.
Yeah.
And presumably without much training, they've only been together out in the desert for a couple of months.
So back to what Vic was trying to introduce, that there are implications that already they may have had the talent to be organized as an army. The sin of Amalek is a very bad sin in warfare, where they attack the people lingering in the back, the weakest. And that is the ultimate sin of Amalek, and that's why the remembering of Amalek, it's a very troublesome concept, because the idea of both remembering and not remembering are a part of the story here. And it's been used as a justification for a lot of killing.
Right. Amalek is the whipping boy of the Kahanas for certain.
Yeah. You don't have to go very far back in our modern history to know where that term became a troublesome term again to justify killing. And it's not, it's never justified. That's the staying in the desert for 40 years. That's that's one of the lessons that has to be learned. It's just never justified. If killing is the only way out of trouble, then you've created other trouble, so you haven't really found your way out of that trouble. Killing
attacking it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying that it's attacking the weak, going to the people that are just barely there anyways.
I'm going to call on Arnie, and then I'm not going to call on people anymore, so you guys are on your own with that.
I love having the last say in this.
Oh, it's not the last say. People will have more to say. It's just that
I
I'm
know,
going
I'm
to
just
be
kidding around.
leaving.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
go
I'm
ahead.
just wondering, is there any indication that the Israelites remember that all these people in Canaan and they're going to encounter and everything are their distant cousins?
Distant cousins are all created in the same image. I mean, there's lots of
No, I mean
reminders.
Abraham and Laban and
Oh,
all the Amorites, the Canaanites, they're all descended from the same lineage, right? And they traded with each other. At times they got along, there's proof that there was a copper incense trade between them, and it goes as far as the Sumerians. They study Torah and they're not Jews, supposedly, So, I mean,
There's no
we have
telling.
all these difficult relationships with different people. It's like our families, I got a cousin who's a real schmuck, So, it's the story of our culture in a way. But I was just wondering historically if there or if in the Torah if it mentions any positive communication with these tribes early on.
Abram has his brother. That's one of the chief tribes.
Yeah,
It came
they,
out.
yeah. So I mean, do they ever, these tribes later on, now in the Moses period, do they recognize each other as being distant relatives, or are they strangers to each other, or what's going on?
I'm just gonna, I mean, we don't know. Remember we say last week, there's no historical evidence of this actually happening this way. But Arnie, when I listen to some of these things, I keep thinking about the roots and Kunta Kinte. At some point on the individual level, whatever the remnants, or they can look at our ancient DNA like you did, that says that this is where we came from. There must have been stories there, and that's why there's so much conflict now, because it was like consolidating all these stories, the game of telephone, what really happened, what didn't happen. But you kind of take an aggregate of all the different witnessing, and somehow over time, somebody who's enlightened or cares or whatever, tries to verify and make a cohesive whole out of all of this. Now, I just was curious because we talked about Amalek last year, and I just clicked in Safari on some of this commentary for that particular line about the Amalek came to fight them. And of course, then I have to go through the ones that are only the ones that are in English that I understand. So they say, why was this put in the story right now? So because Amalek was the grandson of Esau, and that was 400 years earlier. So it wasn't Amalek himself, it was his descendants. So the first thing they talk about is when Esau, over time, it's like there's a king that did a Pharaoh that did not know them. Again, there's the descendants of Jacob's brother who did not know them, or he gave up the birthright, and then when their father died, Esau agreed not to take over Canaan and all that. And now it was like sort of like revenge time. Well, maybe enough time has gone by that we can now even take back that land, and renege on the deal kind of thing. But one of the last things I just read, it struck me, which is from Rashi. Oh, I hope I didn't lose it. He basically said they put the Amalek story in right there because the line before was, is there a God, Lord, who's protecting us or not? So because of their doubts that angered Hashem, he caused these distant relatives to decide to choose that moment to try to overtake them and regain their superiority as a lesson to the Israelites. Wish I could find. Of course, I lost this scrolling where exactly, because this never quite works right. But so ultimately it's symbolic. But I keep I keep saying that all the time before I started this Torah study again, and the genealogy used to drive me crazy. But it's when you realize these relationships that Esau married Ishmael's daughter, that at some point we go back to the whole idea is that at some level you go back far enough, we're all brothers, we're all related, and we should realize that.
Bye-bye.
What did you want to say, Vic?
Well, it's just waving goodbye there. Yeah, but that's the deal. The tribe separated and then living in different places.
But does there have to be enmity forever? If the whole point of the Torah is to say, honor the stranger, live an honorable life by following these commandments, the ultimate result of that is it just can't help but being getting along with your neighbor, and instead of living in the moment with fear and thinking it's a zero-sum game that we can only win if we defeat and overcome this other group, there may be a short-term win, but you don't quote unquote win the war that way. I mean, I think every religious tradition, the whole idea of living on this earth in harmony with the earth itself and with all of our neighbors. It sounds overly simplistic, but you know what? That's the Occam's razor. The trouble is we make it more complicated than it should be. The simplest answer is usually the right one,
But there's built-in discordance, because Amalek is just demonized throughout the Torah. That Amalek is the boogeyman. So
sometimes I wonder, like, how much, like you said, how much is that is Hashem and how much of it is that human made in the context of the history to create a state of mind for their survival, to have that us against them attitude. I get confused about that because the whole idea, Ecclesiastes, all that, and just like with Moshe raising his arms, it doesn't say thou shalt have no war. We want to turn the swords into plowshares, but at this point in the history and even in the literature, it says there's a time for peace, there's a time for war. So until everybody can, and this is how I now define what the idea of a Messiah coming is. It's a time when all of creation will finally recognize that focusing on what distinguishes us rather than what unites us is not what's going to lead to a divinely lived, honorable life. But in the meantime, we're constantly yinning and yanging between these two extremes.
I consider that man is a very violent species. And peace is the tough one. It seems like, man is always, resorted to violence one against another. And it's not, I don't feel great about it, but I also know that, people people don't really gravitate toward peace as a natural state of being.
I know, but that's the whole point. They don't, because their humanness nature, not their spiritual nature, is going to naturally gravitate towards, the idea of what happens in Darwinism and evolution of the species, as opposed to that higher plane of spiritual existence.
Arnie.
You're saying, was it Arnie or Craig?
Craig. Oh, Craig, sorry. Craig.
Yeah. I think that the message is that some people are irredeemable. And the question becomes how many. We already know that Hashem says capital punishment is appropriate, albeit under limited circumstances. So that would be like for a murder or whatever. And for whatever reason, today I'm thinking about pedophiles and sex offenders who are irredeemable. And isn't that the message of Amalek? Because their crime, of course, they were violent, but they attacked the Jews while they were vulnerable and weak. And somebody who is willing to attack the vulnerable and the weak are designated as Amalek, and then we have an obligation to wipe them out. So there you have it.
Sort of built
That's
into this conversation. Built into this conversation is that, some of us really, really treasure and value the whole concept of empathy. And yet there are parts of our society that are anti-empathy and who will publicly speak out against it because they consider it weak.
You mean like a big, powerful country would claim that it had the right to take over another smaller, weaker country, kind of like what's going on right now?
But see, this is the perpetual conflict between the microcosm and the macrocosm. And even to your point, Yehuda, human beings right now, they have a violent nature, or they seem to overall. But being human, what does that mean? And the fact, despots come and go, but we have the equivalent of a Caligula now, and you could talk about reincarnation or what all that is. The concept is that each individual ultimately has the choice to change their ways. So, I mean, this does apply to Arnie's point about being totally, or Craig's point about being totally irredeemable. In theory, technically, no one has to be irredeemable if they make different choices. And the whole Torah and all this is to guide people to stay not to the left or to the right, but if you stay on this path, you can't help but end up making the righteous choices, which will ultimately, over time in this sphere where we have to count chronological time, actually eliminate the enmity and the greed and the hatred toward the other that's not like us, and so on and so forth. And the brotherhood of man, to quote all my Broadway shows, will happen. And how that's been described by the ancients is reaching the Elysian fields, nirvana, or the Messiah coming. Right? I mean, that's ultimately, I think, what that's all about. But then, and so I think it's human beings who say, well, the Messiah can't come until the temple is rebuilt and all that. But in all the religions, the three major religions, it still says that human beings have to modify their behavior, in order to get pure enough, in a way, or to get holy enough, if you want to put it that way, to allow this great